Order, order. Stephen Timms to move the motion.
I'm grateful to you and very pleased to be serving under your chairmanship. I want to talk about an important topic which I think deserves more attention than it's had, and to urge the Minister to change the current hostile environment policies on adult dependent relative visas, which are undermining at the moment the National Health Service. The immigration system should treat overseas nationals working in the UK and their families abroad more fairly than it is doing at the moment. I want to focus particularly on the impact on people working in the NHS. 9 years ago, in 2012, the government changed the immigration rules to establish its hostile environment policy. Under one of the changes, elderly parents or grandparents of British citizens are only permitted to join them in the UK if they can demonstrate that they require a level of long-term personal care that their home country cannot provide. Before 2012, a dependent relative only needed to show they were living alone in the, quote, most exceptional compassionate circumstances. Now, the rules state that doctors are prohibited from bringing their elderly relatives to the UK from overseas unless they meet a very strict set of conditions. The problematic rules are ECDR 2.4 and 2.5. Let me just read them out. 2.4. The applicant, or if the applicant and their partner are the sponsor's parents or grandparents, the applicant's partner must, as a result of age, illness or disability, require long-term personal care to perform everyday tasks. And then 2.5, the applicant, or if the applicant and their partner are the sponsor's parents or grandparents, the applicant's partner, must be unable, even with the practical and financial help of the sponsor, to obtain the required level of care in the country where they are living because A, it is not available, and there is no person in that country who can reasonably provide it, or B, it is not affordable. In practice, Ms Bardell, those conditions are extremely hard to meet. Home Office data shows that in the 4 years from 2017 to 2020 inclusive, 908 visa applications were made under the adult dependence rule. Only 35 were approved at the first attempt. That is, over 96% of them were refused. Some were subsequently granted after the difficulty and expense of an appeal. In 2017, I understand, the Home Office didn't issue a single adult dependent relative visa. Before the rule changes, thousands were approved. So what is the justification for this change? Well, ministers have argued that the rules are to stop adult dependent relatives from entering the UK and burdening taxpayers. But other ways to avoid any burden on the NHS and on local authorities do not appear to have been considered. The existing immigration health surcharge could be incorporated into adult dependent relative applications. Canada, Australia, New Zealand have that sort of model in their schemes for elderly migration. Or applicants could be required to have private medical insurance. We have instead simply made it virtually impossible for elderly relatives to come. Now, Ms Bardell, over the past 2 years, we've all been reminded just how important the National Health Service is. And I know I speak for all of us when I say how grateful we all are for the extraordinary efforts of doctors, nurses and other NHS staff to protect and care for all of us throughout the pandemic. They should be rewarded for their hard work and dedication. But instead, many are being punished with these hostile immigration policies. One doctor, a British national based in Birmingham, has told me about the impact on him. He came from India to train as a GP in 2004. The UK is now his home. He studied here. He's working here. He's bringing up his children here. Sadly, he lost his father to COVID in India earlier this year. Now his 70-year-old mother wants to join her son and his family in the UK, but she's not allowed to do so because of these rules. He tells me, and I quote, "No matter how much I earn and pay in taxes, my inability to look after my mother makes me feel incomplete and unfulfilled." He also feels his children are being denied a relationship, a proper relationship with their grandmother. He says, and I quote, "My children should not be penalised for a decision I took 17 years back to move to the UK." I give way to the honourable gentleman.
I'm very grateful to the honourable member for securing this debate and indeed for raising such an important issue. His account there of his constituent echoes one of a constituent of mine, British national of Indian birth, who's facing the same dilemma, the very difficult personal dilemma of having to, on the one hand, consider her patients and her service to the local NHS, and then to her parents in India on the other. Does he not agree with me that when we discuss this very, very difficult issue, that we should be bearing in mind not only the impact this is having on the NHS, potentially, but also the tragic personal stories and the trauma that it inflicts?
Stephen Timms.
We're putting these dedicated public servants in an impossible position. I received an email yesterday referring to, and I quote, "yet another consultant who's left the NHS to live in Oman so that his mother could be with the family again." Ms Bardell, 6,000 doctors left the NHS to go overseas in the 5 years 2015 to 2020. We don't know the reasons why they all went, but a significant number went for this reason. The chair of the Health Select Committee, former Secretary of State, of course, pointed out to the Prime Minister at questions today that, and I quote, "there are now severe shortages in nearly every speciality." This policy that we're debating this afternoon is part of the problem. We should be bending over backwards to keep doctors here. Instead, we're forcing them to leave the country. Many doctors feel very strongly, as the honourable gentleman has just reminded the House, that they're being denied a family life. The emotional toll increases the risk of burnout. In August this year, the British Association of Physicians of Indian Origin and the Association of Pakistani Physicians of Northern Europe carried out a survey of nearly 1,000 doctors in the UK. 90% reported feelings of anxiety, stress, helplessness because of this issue. Is this really how the UK should be treating doctors who have risked their lives to care for us throughout the pandemic? The rules also have a severe impact on children in the families affected, not least through making it very difficult for them to have a relationship with grandparents, but equally the Joint Council for the Welfare of Immigrants sampled a group of professionals in the UK. They found out that of the 121 children affected, 20% came from families living in lower income households, more likely single earner households. And they point out that having a grandparent who's able to help with childcare will enable parents to work in cases where childcare costs rule that out. The government has said the rules around adult dependent relatives are in place to protect the NHS. Actually, they are undermining the NHS. Medical professionals have busy, stressful lives, even more so in the pandemic. And those with vulnerable relatives abroad often have to take leave, sometimes extended leave, travel overseas often to arrange care for their elderly parents at a time when the NHS needs them here, and we need them here, more than ever. And some doctors have been forced to leave the UK altogether. And the survey that I referenced a moment ago, 8 in 10 respondents were looking at leaving due to these rules. Yes, I'd gladly give way.
Khalid Mahmood.
Madam Bardell. Sorry, Miss Bardell.
Happy to be on my
And I thank my honourable friend from East Ham, who's done terrifically well to secure this very, very urgent debate. Coming from Birmingham, I have the headquarters of these both associations that he referred to. And to train a GP, say a junior doctor, costs about £230,000. And to train a GP or a consultant is about £500,000. Every time we lose one of those consultants, every time we lose one of those GPs, or even a junior doctor, it's a huge cost to us. Should not the government understand when they're looking at value for money in this issue? And these people are well prepared, as is already said, able to support the parents that bring over. They will contribute towards their health insurance and everything else that they've already agreed. But this will give them a peace of mind. And they are hugely stressed at the moment, and most are still thinking of leaving at a time when we need hugely the expertise of these people. Thank you.
My honourable friend is absolutely right. Having invested so much in their training, we need to keep those experts here, not force them to leave the country. There are over 96,000 non-UK graduates on the General Medical Council register. The evidence of the potential loss to the NHS if these restrictions stay in place is enormous. And we simply cannot afford that loss. And the investment that has been made in their training is a very important point, and I'm grateful to my honourable friend for raising it. And this is a real threat. This is not a theoretical worry. The Association of Pakistani Physicians of Northern Europe have said, and I quote, in many cases, highly trained and competent members of staff are leaving the UK to return to their home country or to go somewhere else where the rules are more accommodating in order to care for their elderly family members. And of course, Ms Bardell, these rules are going to apply as well to EU citizens arriving to live in the UK post-Brexit. They will deter skilled doctors from European countries from working here, as they are forced to opt instead for countries with a less hostile and more accommodating policy. And I do also just want to remind the House that adult-dependent entry clearance applications to the UK are among the most expensive type of visas that there are. The cost for an adult who requires care from their relative here is, for a visa application, is £3,250. The government says these rules are to avoid burdening the NHS. I wonder whether the Minister can put a figure for us on the cost a more accommodating policy would impose. What is the estimate that we're talking about? And what will the cost be of losing all these skilled, highly trained staff forced to leave in order to fulfil their family responsibilities? The BMA, Ms Bardell, represents and negotiates on behalf of all doctors and medical students in the UK. In January, together with other leading medical bodies, they wrote to the Home Secretary asking her to remove this restrictive adult dependence rule for doctors. Soon after their letter, I wrote to their then Immigration Minister asking him to meet to discuss the issue. He declined my request to meet and simply told me, quote, those most in need of care remain the most likely to qualify. But the problem is enormous numbers are not able to come. According to the Home Office, just 70 adult-dependent relative visas were issued in 2020. The government needs at least to review its application process to determine just why so few applicants succeed. I'm absolutely certain the Minister will have received representations from the Health Secretary about this, and I very much hope that this review will be undertaken. The BMA has consistently raised concerns about the potential impact on patient care and on the wider NHS if doctors do have to move because of these rules. Ministers don't seem to be taking much notice of the urgent concerns of those working on the front line of our health service about this, but it is time now to start taking notice before really serious harm starts to be inflicted on the NHS. The doctors must not be kept waiting any longer. So, Ms Bardell, there's no justification for forcing committed, dedicated NHS doctors to choose between their work and their home in the UK on the one hand and their duty, deeply felt duty, to their elderly parents on the other, to support and care for them in difficulty and in old age. Will the Minister commit today to review this unfair policy? Why is it that so few applicants have been successful in the past 9 years? Why are ministers weakening the NHS in order to prevent elderly relatives from joining their key worker families here in the UK?
Thank you, Ms Bardell, and it's a pleasure to serve under your chairship and I want to thank the Honourable Member for East Ham for sponsoring this debate. I'd also like to thank the other members who've contributed, and I recognise the strength of feeling on the topic, as the Honourable Gentleman has so eloquently articulated. I will respond to his specific points as best as I can in the time that I have, but it will be helpful if I set out some background on adult-dependent relative visas. The family immigration rules were reformed in July 2012 to ease the burden on the taxpayer, promote integration and tackle abuse, thereby ensuring family migration to the UK is fair to migrants and to the wider community. Costs associated with cases under the route for adult-dependent relatives can be significant. The Department of Health has previously estimated a person living to the age of 85 costs the NHS on average around £150,000 in their lifetime, with more than 50% of this cost arising from the age of 65 onwards. And this figure, it's important to note, does not take account of any social care costs met by local authorities. Under the rules, adult dependents must demonstrate as a result of age, illness or disability that they require a level of long-term personal care which can only be provided in the UK by their sponsor here and without recourse to public funds. They must apply from overseas and not while in the UK as a visitor. The rules in place before July 2012 essentially provided an expectation of settlement in the UK for a parent or grandparent aged 65 or over where they were financially dependent on their UK sponsor, subject to the provision by the sponsor of a 5-year undertaking that they could maintain and accommodate the adult dependent relative without access to public funds. And they also enabled a parent or grandparent under the age of 65 and other adult dependent relatives of any age to apply to settle permanently in the UK in the most exceptional, compassionate circumstances, as the Honourable Gentleman has said. The old rules allowed an application to be made in the UK, including while here as a visitor as well as overseas. The current rules, Ms Bardell, for adult dependent relatives seeks to ensure only those who need to be physically close to and cared for by a close relative in the UK are able to settle here. Those who do not have such care needs can be supported financially in the country in which they live by their relative in the UK. And those most in need of care remain most likely to qualify compared with those who have a preference to come and live in the UK with a relative here. The lawfulness of the current rules was upheld by the Court of Appeal in May 2017. The government is committed to ensuring people here legally are welcomed and... Yes, I will give way.
Does the Minister understand the fact this is not just a question of finances and money? This is an issue of relationships in terms of parents, children and grandchildren, of building and withstanding a family. You can support somebody on their own abroad, but you can't have that linkage of family growing.
Rachel McLean.
Yes, I fully understand your Honourable Gentleman's point, but it is the government's duty to formulate the rules that are fair to the British taxpayer and to the NHS and to ensure a fair system. I will come on to the specific issues about the health service that the Honourable Gentleman alluded to, but it is vital that our immigration policies do not place an unfair burden on the taxpayer. We want to ensure that people here, legally, are welcomed and celebrated, as we do in this country, as part of a fair and sustainable immigration system. All family migration to the UK, including adult dependent relatives, must be on a properly sustainable basis, which is fair to both migrants and the wider community. And so our position on adult dependent relatives remains that we have rules in place to support those who are most in need, but we are clear that the rules cannot provide a route for every parent to join their adult child in the UK and settle here. It is simply not sustainable for the economy or the health service for there to be a routine expectation of settlement in the UK for parents and grandparents aged 65 or over. And so it is the case that only those requiring long-term care, which cannot be delivered in the country in which they are living, should be eligible to settle here. And while we fully understand that these cases provoke strong feelings, as the members have articulated, they can result in difficult choices for individuals. It is essential that the rules are fair and balanced for the taxpayer, given the significant NHS and social care costs which can arise when those adult-dependent relatives settle in the UK. And failure to maintain this balance puts the legitimacy of the entire system at risk. So I want to turn to the issue of the NHS. I will say, of course, we are hugely grateful for the vital contributions of all NHS staff. particularly during the pandemic, and the government has no intention whatsoever of punishing this group. By contrast, we've introduced a range of unprecedented measures to ensure the health and care sector are supported fully. However, it's only fair I address the points that are raised. The impact of medical professionals potentially leaving the NHS was raised 5 years ago and was considered as part of the Home Office review of the Adult Dependent Relative Rules published in December 2016. And that report considered the number of NHS staff who support adult dependent relatives overseas is likely to be a small proportion of the total population of professionally qualified clinical staff. And furthermore, there is no evidence to show that significant numbers of medical professionals have left or been deterred from applying to work in the UK since the revised rules were implemented. And it was concluded that while some UK sponsors may choose to leave the UK as a result of the revised rules, including some who are in skilled employment, the impact remains proportionate to the policy aim. The latest figures show that in the year ending June 2021, there was a 19% increase in skilled work visas granted, and the majority of that increase was due to the new skilled worker and skilled worker health and care visas. And these saw 45,722 grants, accounting for 44% of the total skilled work visas granted. In fact, such was the demand for overseas doctors and nurses wanting to come to work in the UK that in 2018 the government lifted the cap on doctors and nurses, and the Health Secretary at the time said overseas staff have been a vital part of our NHS since its creation 70 years ago. And today's news sends a clear message to nurses and doctors from around the world that the NHS welcomes and values their skills and dedication. So there is no evidence, as I said, that significant numbers of professionals have been deterred from applying to work in the UK since the new adult dependent rules were implemented, and nor is there evidence to show that professionals have left the UK. And there have been significant savings made by the NHS since the rules were introduced, and the 2016 report notes that once assumptions were taken into account, the figures suggested potential NHS savings of around £249 million over 10 years. The policy will be kept under review, and we are, of course, sympathetic to the impacts on individuals and families, but the policy must apply fairly across our society, and it would not be right to provide a more generous approach for healthcare professionals than for other groups. Yes.
Ben Lake.
Giving way on that point, and just to elaborate and to add perhaps to the considerations, of course, there's an impact on the family, there's an impact also on the community. In many rural areas such as mine, if we lose a solitary GP who has to go back, we do not have a GP practice for a very large area. So there is that wider impact as well that we should bear in mind, even though maybe an individual example, it has quite a widespread impact.
Minister.
Of course, I recognise the impact of those issues that the honourable gentleman has highlighted. I just want to turn to the point that the honourable member has made, that we have not considered the other ways to avoid the burden on the NHS and local authorities, and he made comparisons with other countries and their systems. I just want to advise him that we did consider other ways. The Home Office published a review of the adult dependent rules in December 2016, and as I said, we continue to keep it under review. And this report is published on gov.uk, so I would encourage him to look at that. As part of that review, specific considerations were given to alternative methods of achieving the main aim, which is reducing the burden on the taxpayer and NHS costs. And these alternatives were mandatory medical and care insurance, amendments to the immigration health surcharge, and a bond scheme requiring a payment upfront which is offset against the cost of any later NHS care. Particular consideration was given to how far each of those would achieve the policy intention, be feasible to administer, and also continue to allow an adult dependent relative with significant long-term personal care needs which couldn't be met in their home country to join their relative. These options were considered to place a potentially unreasonable administrative burden on the NHS, while also raising significant concerns over affordability and discrimination. For example, mandatory private healthcare insurance was considered to be likely to be prohibitively expensive, especially if it were to cover NHS emergency treatment and or social care and residential care. And it would also benefit only those applicants whose sponsor had substantial means, and those without a close relative here with such means would be excluded from the UK, even if they required long-term personal care, which could only be provided by their relative here. And there's also no guarantee that insurance taken at the date of application will not be later cancelled or not renewed including in circumstances outside that person's control, such as a significant deterioration in their health or a change in the financial circumstances of their sponsor, which made the insurance unavailable or the premiums unaffordable. And in fact, any alternative scheme that required an upfront payment of many thousands of pounds would by definition exclude those cases unable to pay it, regardless of the level of their personal care needs. And similarly, in light of the estimates I mentioned earlier that a person aged 65 to 74 costs the NHS £2,287 a year, such a scheme for adult dependents would likely need to be set at significantly more than its current level. And so that's why it was concluded that the revised rules were set at the right level to provide immediate settled status in the UK and free access to the NHS to those relatives whose care needs could not be met in their home country, while protecting the NHS and the burden. Of course.
Stephen Timms.
For giving way. She made the point that there is no evidence of people leaving, of doctors leaving the UK for this reason. We do know that 6,000 doctors have left to go overseas in the 5 years, 2015 to 2020. She's right, we don't know the reason they all went, but it's clear that at least hundreds went for this reason, possibly a big proportion of those 6,000. Isn't she concerned about that loss of skilled doctors, committed doctors, to the health service at a time when, as the chair of the Select Committee pointed out at lunchtime today, there is a shortage in nearly every speciality?
Minister.
Well, of course, I thank the honourable gentleman for his point, and he's right to ask the question. As I said earlier, we don't have verified evidence of those numbers, as he refers to, nor do we have the specific evidence that points to this specific reason. There may be a number of reasons why people choose to leave and work in another country. And moreover, I would point to the evidence in front of us of the people who are choosing to take up those skill visas to come to this country. So that it is clearly not a deterrent. And I do refer to my earlier remarks about the policy intention of introducing these changes to the rule to make sure that it is only those people that genuinely do need to come here who are the people who we would see as covered by the rules, and therefore they would be able to come here under the system that we have. In conclusion, Ms Bardell, I do recognise this is a emotive subject, and I pay tribute to the honourable gentleman for the way in which he has articulated it. And of course, I and the government want to support the NHS. We do keep our policies under review, as I have said. We have given considerable care and consideration to the factors that he's mentioned, of course.
Very generous. I just wanted to... She made a lot about the cost issue. I think she was indicating that something like 175,000 might be the amount that you'd expect for care and health costs for somebody elderly arriving in the UK. But a GP has had £500,000 invested in them. I just wonder whether that assessment has been made somewhere about the value for taxpayers, the straightforward financial costs of forcing somebody highly trained out of the country versus the cost of care for their elderly relative.
I thank the honourable gentleman, and I can reassure him that the costs have been considered in the round, including those costs he refers to and others. In fact, those figures I quoted at the beginning of my remarks did not include care costs, which I'm sure he will agree are significantly higher than those costs I've referred to, which are purely treatment and costs. Thank you, Ms Bardell.